It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Sherry Bard from Echoes and Reflections. Sherry is an education consultant who specializes in professional development for secondary school teachers. She worked at the USC Shoah Foundation Institute for Visual History and Education for over 17 years, where she held several positions including Director of Education. If you'd like to learn more about Sherry, please click on the speaker bio box and the arrow so you can read her full presentation here. And now, without any further ado, I am going to hand it off to Sherry. Sherry, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yes, my name is Sherry Bard, and all of us here are delighted you can join us for the Spotlight on Contemporary Anti-Semitism webinar. I happen to be coming to you from Los Angeles. I know many of you are from different parts of the country. That's the really nice thing about a webinar. We get to kind of meet in this common space from many different locations. So if you take a look at the slide I just put up, I'd like to take a moment and ask you to look at that quote, which is from the late Holocaust survivor, professor, author, and activist Elie Wiesel. I think this statement helps to frame our topic for today, so just take that moment and look at that. I'm very pleased to be the facilitator of this webinar during this 1 hour we're together, and I encourage you to participate across all the different options we have, from the poll questions to the chatting and all the other resources that are being made available to you. So, from the various logos on the screen, this is an Echoes and Reflections webinar. So I'd like to begin by just telling you a little bit about Echoes and Reflection. We are leaders in Holocaust education. We've trained more than 30,000 middle and high school teachers across the United States, just about in every state over the last 12 plus years. The program combines the competencies and expertise of 3 world-class leaders in education who've partnered together to make this program possible. They are the Anti-Defamation League. You may have heard of them. They're also known for short as the ADL. They're an international organization, over 100 years old, and we are dedicated to combating anti-Semitism and hate and securing justice and fair treatment for all people. The second partner is the USC Shoah Foundation, the organization I've worked for previously. You may have heard of this organization. It was founded by Steven Spielberg, the film director, after he made Schindler's List, with the purpose of recording videotape interviews with Holocaust survivors and other witnesses so that their stories can be a compelling voice for education and action. And Yad Vashem is the third partner, and you may know they are located in Israel. They're an educational organization, memorial, museum, and archive dedicated to Holocaust remembrance and scholarship. As you'll see, Echoes and Reflections provides access to visual history testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation archive, as well as other digital tools. We'll be watching 1 or 2 interviews with Holocaust survivors today, so I'm very excited about that. Another aspect of this program, we offer a wide array of primary and secondary source materials about the Holocaust and related topics. And we offer a teacher's guide. If you go to the echoesandreflections.org, you can find out more about the teacher's guide, and a website, which I will be pointing to throughout the program, where many of our assets can be found. And we offer face-to-face training, online courses, and webinars, just as we are doing today. So I'd like to start with a question and have you think a little bit about your perception of anti-Semitism today. As we know, contemporary anti-Semitism is the topic of this webinar. So look at these three responses. Which statement describes anti-Semitism in the U.S. today? Do you think anti-Semitism is on the decline? It is about the same as it was during the previous year, or is it on the rise? So take a moment and choose your answer and hit the submit button. Okay, well, thank you for responding to that poll. Those are really good results, interesting results. Now let's take a look at some data on this topic. But by the way, you might see the word anti-Semitism written as one word throughout this webinar and on these slides, or as a hyphenated word. Both are correct. The Echoes and Reflections turns out it writes anti-Semitism as one word, but the Anti-Defamation League, one of our partners, hyphenates it. So I'm trying to be respectful of everybody's way, how they want to write it, but don't be surprised if you see it both ways. Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, has been tracking anti-Semitic incidents in the United States since 1979. Their audit, that's what they call their reporting, includes both criminal and non-criminal incidents, acts of harassment and intimidation, including distribution of hate propaganda, threats, and slurs. The data is compiled using information provided by victims, by law enforcement, and community leaders. And then all this information is compiled and evaluated by the anti-defamation professional staff. So as you can see from this chart, for the first quarter of 2017, which is the most recent information that is available, that is for the months of January through March, there was an 86% rise in anti-Semitic incidences over the previous year in 2016, with a total of 541 incidents. So if you chose the response, anti-Semitism is on the rise in the U.S., you are correct. So what accounts for this rise? Well, one factor was the 2016 presidential election and the heightened political atmosphere. There were 34 incidents recorded that linked specifically to the election. Also, incidents on college campuses increased from 90 in 2015 to 108 in 2016. So here's just a little bit more data. Anti-Semitic incidents at non-Jewish elementary, middle, and high schools increased 106%, from 114 in 2005 to 235 in 2016. And this increase accelerated in the first quarter in 2017 when 95 incidents were recorded. Also, I wanted to point out that the ADL says that these incidents need to be seen in the context of a general resurgence of white supremacist activity in the United States. So I'd like to ask you to put some information in the chat box and to use the chat function by answering the following question. What would be a reason why we might want to address this topic, anti-Semitism, contemporary anti-Semitism, in the classroom? Think big picture, or think about specifics. Why would we want to raise this in the classroom? So go ahead and put that in the chat box. what your thoughts are. Why would we want to address this topic of contemporary anti-Semitism in the classroom? So please continue writing, and I'd like to summarize kind of what I'm seeing people are saying and to add some additional facts. So today, we know students may be witnessing anti-Semitic acts. They may see it in the news. They may read about it on social media, witness this in their own communities and schools. So that's something that would prompt us to address this. The topic of contemporary anti-Semitism can be a springboard for discussion about prejudice and bias against other groups and can help sensitize students to the harm and suffering of others. I think that's a really big picture outcome we'd love to see, more sensitivity to suffering of others. And learning about contemporary anti-Semitism and the information and the activities in this lesson that I'm sharing with you today can help stimulate discussion on the role and responsibility of individuals and the importance of recognizing and interrupting bias no matter what group is being targeted. Because when one group is being targeted, marginalized, it does affect everyone. So let's just quickly review our goals and our objectives for today's webinar. Our overall goal is to become familiar with the resources in the contemporary anti-Semitism lesson, which I am sharing with you today. And how will we achieve this goal? We have a few different objectives. We're going to explore the definition of contemporary anti-Semitism. What do we actually mean when we use that term? I will share with you the Global 100 tool. You'll be very interested to see what that is. It's an interactive web tool which looks at anti-Semitism around the world. We will discuss the difference between legitimate and anti-Semitic criticism of Israel, a topic that can be related to anti-Semitism. We see that today. And we'll also consider what it means to be an activist. Once we learn about this, what can we do about it? Well, we only have time to look at a few examples. I'll hope you'll take the time to explore the many resources on the Echoes and Reflections website in greater detail. So where can you find this material? Oops, I'm going to just go back one. On the Echoes and Reflections website. So now we're ready to look at our next poll question. So, anti-Semitism, is this a new concept? I think most of you know it's not new. We've heard it before. But how long has it been really in existence? So I'd like you to select from the following answers. How long has anti-Semitism existed as far as we know? Was that more than 2,000 years? More than 1,000 years? More than 300? Or since about 1933 when Adolf Hitler came to power, which was more than 80 years ago today. So consider these four options and choose the answer you think best responds to the question and hit the submit button. So the topic of anti-Semitism, and I have a feeling many of you will know this, it can be a challenging one, most especially because it's complex, it's multifaceted, it can be an intimidating topic if you feel you don't know that much about it. It has a relatively long history. We'll get into that in a minute. In fact, it has a very long history of over 2,000 years. So if you chose that answer, that was the best one to answer our question. Sometimes it can be more difficult to discuss a current issue than one that happened many years ago. With the case of contemporary anti-Semitism, it can in some examples, as I mentioned earlier, tied to the state of Israel, which can be a political topic as well as a personal one, so highly sensitive. So here is where we have the materials that I am pulling from this webinar. This is echoesandreflections.org. What I'm showing you is the home page. If you see the arrow is pointing to a drop-down box on lessons and then lesson components. When you click on that, you will see components. If you scroll all the way to the bottom to supplementary materials, contemporary anti-Semitism, that's where you'll find the lesson as a whole as well as in its components. So I just want to make sure that you know where you can find the materials we will be looking at today. So hi, that was Marta. Now in the chat box, please add your responses to the question, what are some of the possible reasons why Marta believes it is important to speak about her experience during the Holocaust? So go ahead and add your answers to that question. Why is it important for her to speak about her experience? So go ahead and continue writing. I'd like to add a few additional points to keep in mind. So with some individuals and groups, anti-Semitism has now morphed into the belief that the Holocaust never happened. You probably have heard that, or is minimized despite facts and testimony that say otherwise. And as we all know, Holocaust survivors can be very powerful figures to counter anti-Semitic beliefs that persist today, but they are now not many, and soon they will be gone. So it's really upon us as educators to think about how we can continue the work of survivors to help combat ignorance and hate. So if you want more information on the general topic of anti-Semitism, you can go to lesson 2 on the actual on the Echoes and Reflections website for more information.
I think it's important that youth hear something from a survivor. And let's face it, I'm one of the youngest survivors. From Auschwitz, definitely. I don't think there's many my age. And I think it's important that I hear it from yourself. There was an interesting case I had in Camberwell High some years ago. And I must mention that. I spoke to children. I used to speak there for over 10 years every year, to the year 10s. And it's a very large school. I don't know if you know the school, and they're multicultural, very multicultural. And the first time I spoke for 45 minutes, and it wasn't enough. So after that, the woman in charge organized always to have a double period and brought all the kids into the library. And usually they are as quiet as you can hear a pin drop. And one particular occasion, there was a fight outside after I spoke. And usually she gives me 2 periods, because I said to her, it doesn't matter, you can't put it all into a very short period of time. And these are year 10 children, we've got to remember. So they're not that sophisticated, but that's when they do German history or something. And they usually ask questions and are very interested. And there was this fight outside as we were walking out, and she found out later, she called me, and she found out later, it was a boy, the son of a journalist, who had a fight with the other kids because he said she's lying, and all she said was lies, and it didn't happen like that. And there were no death camps, there were only concentration camps where people worked, and she's a liar. And so he had a fist fight with some other kids who says, how can you say it? You saw her number on her arm. And so this woman who organizes the talks called them in, and he said, listen, your father's a journalist, go home My father said it's a lie. That's why he said, it's a lie and it's not true. So she said, I'll tell you what. Go home, tell your dad that you heard this lady talk who said she was in concentration camp in Auschwitz, and you saw her number. She's talking about what happened to her. Ask him if he thinks if it's true or not, or whether it's a lie, that she's lying. And then come back and see me. So he came back. We're talking about, 15, 16-year-olds. And he came back with his tail between his legs, and he said, yes, I had a talk with Dad, and I told him that I actually heard this lady talk. I saw her number on her arm. And he admitted that he's an anti-Semite, and that's why he's always been writing and saying that it didn't happen. So she rang me up to tell me, because she knows how much it takes out of me, and she just felt that it makes it a bit worse, the pain more worse.
So what is contemporary anti-Semitism? What do we mean when we say that term? I copied and pasted the definition from the Echoes and Reflections website, and I'd like to read it to you out loud. The information will help continue to frame our thinking and discussion from this point forward. As the memory of the Holocaust fade and criticism of Israel has mounted, many inhibitions have weakened. Today, anti-Semitism has a global reach. It is expressed openly in the form of hate speech, violence, and denial and distortion of the Holocaust. It is also expressed as opposition to Israel's right to exist, which includes demonization of its people and its leaders. The term excuse me for that, the term sometimes used to describe this modern form of anti-Semitism is the new anti-Semitism. Many of the classic themes and stereotypes from earlier times are reappearing, such as depiction of Jews as subhuman. Sometimes we may see this as represented as spiders, bloodthirsty vampires, and octopuses. The myth about their Jews' quest for world domination and their control over the media, economy, and government or other societal institutions. The fictionalized protocols of the Elders of Zion, first printed more than a century ago, remains the most widely published piece of anti-Semitic literature of all time. In many Middle Eastern countries, anti-Semitism is promoted in state-controlled media and in educational systems. Militant groups with political power, such as Hamas, use genocidal language regarding Jews and Israel. The former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, repeatedly declared the Holocaust, a myth, and that Israel should be wiped off the map. In Europe, anti-Semitism is increasingly espoused among both far-right and far-left political parties. In the United States, Jewish students on some college campuses are confronted by anti-Semitic hostility, while other Jewish individuals and institutions are assaulted, vandalized, and harassed. With the advances in communication technology, anti-Semitism is now widely and easily spread through diverse media outlets, with anti-Semitic groups and individuals using social media platforms at an alarming rate to reach across the world to share their ideology, especially with young people who are the most vulnerable. So in just a moment, we'll look at how widespread anti-Semitism is today. In 2014, the ADL conducted a survey with tens of thousands of individuals in 100 countries across the world to determine the level of anti-Semitic attitudes, which they translated in what they call the Anti-Semitic Index. You could read more about it by going to the website global100.adl.org. Okay, we're going to look at that in a minute, but now I'd like to ask you another poll question. So please choose the answer you feel best fits the question. Which region of the world has the highest anti-Semitic index? Is it the Americas? That would be North and South America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, or Oceania, or Australia? Please choose the answer you feel best responds to this question. Thank you for your responses. If you chose the Middle East and North Africa, you are correct. The anti-Semitic index in this region is 74%. That means, based on the survey, 3 out of 4 individuals harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. As you'll see, the index for the entire world is 26%, which is approximately 1 in 4 individuals. So this is a very interactive website, things to click on. You can find much information. I've clicked on the section on Holocaust Denial. As you can see, this ties directly to Marta's testimony. So take a look at these percentages. And I'd like to ask you a question to respond to in the chat box. How will the data from the Global 100 that we're looking at now, together with Marta's testimony, help your students rethink that anti-Semitism is no longer in existence, which is a likely answer students might have. They may not have seen it, heard about it. Some of them may have, but this information can be helpful. So go ahead and add your answers in that chat box. And as you're writing, I will add a few points. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to Holocaust denial or distortion, new expressions of anti-Semitism, including opposition to the state of Israel's right to exist, can be seen. We understand that even broaching a conversation about Israel can be tough for teachers, especially if unfamiliar with the history, and more specifically the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So we've included in this lesson some background material about the state of Israel and its history to help you and your students have some fundamental understanding, but by no means are these comprehensive or intended to give you the entire complex history. And because our purpose is not to try to compel students to accept or defend the policies of the State of Israel, but just to become more aware of the anti-Semitic nature of some of the criticism and charges and efforts in the U.S. and elsewhere that are leveled against Israel and its right to exist, we feel it's important to share this information, and our hope is to help students develop those critical thinking and media literacy skills to assess if anti-Semitism is the operating force behind that criticism. So take a look at these 2 images. These are cartoons that were published in various newspapers. And think back to the definition we reviewed earlier about how anti-Semitism, the contemporary anti-Semitism, is appearing today. So in the chat box, please note what elements do you see that speak to the different forms of anti-Semitism. What messages are these communicating to the viewers, if you take a look at them? And go ahead and add those comments into the chat box. And how, what comparisons are being made, what imagery are you seeing? Go ahead and add those. Very, very good. So we talked a little bit about how we can distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and when it becomes anti-Semitism. And everybody has a right to criticize a democracy, which is Israel, but when does it cross the line? Well, Natan Sharansky, who is the minister in the Israeli government in charge of monitoring anti-Semitism, has developed what he calls the 3 Ds test. The first one is demonization. When Israel and its leaders are being demonized, when Israel's actions are blown out of all sensible proportion, When comparisons are made between Israelis and Nazis, which we can see in one of those cartoon images, and between Palestinian refugee camps and Auschwitz, this is considered anti-Semitism, not legitimate criticism of Israel. The second D is double standard. When criticism of Israel is applied selectively, when Israel is singled out by the United Nations for human rights abuses, while the behavior of known and major abuses such as China, Iran, Cuba, and Syria is ignored, this is considered anti-Semitism. And the third D is delegitimization. When Israel's fundamental right to exist is denied, this too is considered anti-Semitism. So when teaching about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, we strive not only for the acquisition of knowledge and the development of empathy, but also the motivation to act. There are many examples throughout this lesson, but the last part considered what action against contemporary anti-Semitism could look like from individuals. During the course of the Holocaust and throughout other events in history, we have seen that the acts of ordinary people can have a lasting and potentially profound effect. So let's take a minute and look at what is an activist. What does that mean? So I'd like you to, again, use the chat function and provide what you think is a definition or in a few words, what makes an activist. Go ahead and share your thoughts about the qualities of being an activist. What makes an activist? This is definitely a topic that you can have related to contemporary anti-Semitism or other social action or social justice topics that you're doing in the classroom. So I'm going to add to what people are saying. Here's some thoughts to consider. Anyone who believes strongly in political or social change, involved to achieve change, can inspire others, possesses personal motivation, will give their own time and energy, and embodies moral courage. So that's what makes an activist. So I'd like to introduce you to an activist. We have different features in this lesson, and as well as different scenarios. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm kind of just giving you a taste of some of the materials we have. So this young activist, his name is Savosh Derakarty. He is a young man from Sweden, and he's taken a stand against anti-Semitism. You could read his profile on Echoes and Reflections, but let me give you just a little background on him. He is a Swedish Muslim in his mid-20s. When he was a young boy, he emigrated from Iran to Sweden with his parents when his country was at war with Iraq. He became aware of prejudice at an early age. His two best friends at school were a Jew and a Roma. They all bonded because they were minorities and felt excluded. His Jewish friends was often taunted and bullied with phrases such as dirty Jew and Jews to the gas. Savosh became his friend's bodyguard. As a teenager, his father took him to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Savosh was deeply moved and came up with the idea to start a dialogue with his peers. Only at the age of 19, he founded Young Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, now known as Young People Against Anti-Semitism. He works with schools and community groups to bring young Jews and Muslims together to resolve their differences, and he continues working because he believes in a safe world for everyone. So I'd like to ask you now in the chat box to share your thoughts about Savosh and his activism. What risk do you think he has to deal with as the leader of his organization? What risks? Take a moment and put in your thoughts. Okay, so definitely he needs to balance risk with pushing the boundaries in order to challenge bigotry. So we just have a few minutes left, and I'd like to end our webinar with one more clip. Holocaust survivor Henry Ortelt. This creates a nice bookend to Marta Weiss's testimony, so let me tell you a little bit about Henry. Henry was born on January 13th, 1921 in Berlin, Germany. He was forced to live in the Theresienstadt ghetto and was later imprisoned in a number of camps, including the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp. His interview was conducted in the United States when the war began. Henry was 18 years old. So as you listen to Henry's testimony, think about any words or phrases that resonate with you. And then you will add those to the chat box. So it's my pleasure to play for you Henry's testimony.
I'm speaking an awful lot on all kinds of universities here in the state and out of the state, an awful lot to high schools in the city, out of the city. And I'm always trying to let the message go through that it is time for people to recognize that the world is made out of many, many different people. Different colors, different sizes, and all kinds of differences. That is about time that we recognize that. It's about time that we learn to live with it. And one way to learn to live with it is that, and it is about time for that, that we start to learn about each other. And while we may not agree with the ideology and the lifestyle of other people, it is time, by knowing about them, to respect them as I expect them to respect me. And if this can come down, and I think we're making some progress, not a lot, but I see some progress here and there. If this can come about, then I think the world will be a much better place. And the letters and reactions that I get to my speaking shows an awful lot. I get so many letters that people tell me, I never looked at it that way. And it's just a wonderful thing, and from now on I will be watching out for it. And there were many, many wonderful results that I have out of this, and this is what I'm doing. That's basically my main message, because I tell them I am the prime example of what can happen to people that are suffering under prejudicial circumstances and biases, and when nobody speaks up. We have to learn to speak up when we see
So go ahead and add your words and thoughts about Henry and what he is telling us. I think testimony clips very much serve to personalize the history of the Holocaust, to make it real for students, seeing a face, hearing a voice, hearing the emotions of individuals who experience historical events can really give history kind of more humanity and make it more relatable. As you know, students live online in the video world, so we can see them relate. And I want to take this moment to thank you for your time, for listening, for taking time out of your busy schedule. As a former teacher, I know how busy you are, and for choosing this webinar and participating. I think these experiences kind of help us to navigate complex topics and engage us. So I want to thank you for your time again, and I hope you will explore the Echoes and Reflections website, and it's been a pleasure to meet you virtually during this webinar. And now I will turn it back to Katie.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. This is actually Natalie, and we're going to move into the question and answer portion of this webinar. Okay, sorry, I don't know if you all heard me, but this is actually Natalie with AFT and Share My Lesson, and we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the webinar. If you have questions, I just want to remind you that you can do so. You can submit them through the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. Before we get started, Sherry, I just wanted to thank you so much for this presentation. It was extremely insightful in more ways than one, and so I really appreciate you sharing. I thought the clips were very, very personal and really helped to paint the picture of the narrative. So thank you so much for such a great presentation.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Of course, I'm here. My dog was quiet up until now, and now, of course, he's barking. But anyway, it's such a pleasure to share this information with everyone, and I'd love to hear any questions that you may have. I wish, the time goes by so quickly that, you can't put so much content in, so I really encourage you to explore this more deeply. And it is a great springboard to talk about, prejudice and anti-bias in the classroom and citizenship. So I hope you will look further.
Right. We have one question that we'll start off with, and let's see. Here we go. Oh, really quickly, before we go into Q&A, everyone, I'd like to remind you that if you've missed any of the poll questions, that's quite all right. You can log in after this poll ends and answer any of the poll questions you've missed. And once you do that, you will be able to print out, your professional development certificate. So just to give you a reminder about that. Well, we don't have a question, but Julie says she took part in an Echoes and Reflection training several years ago, and she highly recommends it to all. So thank you, Julie, for that feedback.
If you go on the echoesandreflections.org website, you can see various training opportunities. We're also delighted to work with Share My Lesson. They've been terrific to work with, so professional, really trying to make this experience as meaningful as possible. So I give you guys a lot of credit.
And I see some questions have been put into the group chat, so I will try to go through those, but please make sure you're using the Q&A box. And also, ladies and gentlemen, please know that any of the links that Sherry mentioned can be found in the presentation, which you can download to the left of your screen. Cynthia would like to know, Sherry, what other aspects of prejudice and tolerance of other people are promoted on your website?
Well, Echoes and Reflections is a program that focuses really on teaching the Holocaust. So we're very much focused on that specific experience. And the lesson on contemporary anti-Semitism kind of is a follow-up. We always like to take history and bring it into the present and how our world is today. So this is a very specific slice of history. However, one of our partners, the USC Shoah Foundation, if you go to their website or Google them, they have actually collected testimonies from more recent genocides as well. And so you can find stories about people from Rwanda and Cambodia and what happened there. And so to kind of really broaden the discussion, because as we know, genocide continues to happen in the world today. So there's some wonderful resources from our partner who really is focusing on that. You know, each organization has to choose their focus. I'm sure also on the Anti-Defamation League website you can see also experiences of how to deal with prejudice in the world today. So I encourage you to look at that partner's website as well.
That's a great point, Sherry. Thank you. ADL is also a partner of Share My Lesson, and there are a lot of resources that they have based on teaching tolerance for all groups. So definitely something to take a look at on our website. Paul has a question, Sherry. How can we frame a respectful discussion about some of the controversial aspects of Israeli politics? For example, the wall and settlements.
That is very complex. And I think a lot of teachers kind of shy away from that topic. It could come up. I think it's okay for students to actually go and do a little research on their own. I think having some background information on the history of Israel is helpful, and we do have, I think it's about 2 or 3 pages that kind of lays out kind of where the borders were originally, what the history of the state of Israel was, how that impacts kind of perception today. And chances are, you're going to get various points of view. And what I always like to say is what we want to do is create a respectful atmosphere in the classroom, that we could hear each other's opinions. But I think it's a topic where people or students have to kind of do a little more research on their own about this topic, and then bring that back to the classroom. It's highly charged topic, and so creating that classroom of mutual respect is very essential. There is a number of websites that really help navigate that issue about the Israeli settlements. One is called Stand With Us, and I feel like they really strike a good balance on presenting, factual information to give good context to that question.
Great. And we do have time for one more question, so if you all want to submit a question in the Q&A box, by all means, please do so. One more time, I just wanted to remind you all, because I am seeing some questions, that it is quite all right if you've missed a poll. You can log back in once this webinar has ended and answer any of the polls that you've missed, and you'll be all good to then download your PD certificate. Sherry, are there any last words you'd like to share with our audience?
I think listening to the testimonies really helped to personalize this. Even my little dog Teddy agrees with that. To personalize this topic, and there's nothing like putting a human face and hearing somebody who's been through an experience express themselves, and also the personal profiles of those people who are taking a stand. So, we really want to make this topic relatable. So I hope you'll explore it further. And thank you for your time.
Awesome. Attendees, thank you all so much for joining us today. And remember to download your professional development certificate by clicking on the PD certificate widget that's found on the left side of your screen. Also, please take the survey that will show up on your screen momentarily. This feedback is valuable to our speakers and to the Share My Lesson team as we plan future webinars. With that said, if there are any questions that come in later or that we have not addressed, we will forward these on to Sherry, and she will be able to respond to you directly. But again, thank you all so very much for joining us, and please take a look out for some of the other webinars either on our site or that we will be hosting in the near future. With that said, have a wonderful, wonderful day.